This video was sponsored by Canary. Go to canarylabs.com or use the link in the description to learn more about their enterprise class process data historian. Now let's get into the podcast. All right, so Zach, everybody, welcome to this 4.0 Solutions podcast. We're here with Rick Bullotta. We're going to get into his background story and we're going to talk tech. But the first thing I wanted to ask, Rick, was when you were there at Wonderware just after they went public, how many new cars were in the parking lot after they went public, and what kind of cars were they?
There was a lot of nice cars in the parking lot. I mean, you think about it, I was the first industrial software company that went that route. And I think it was one of the first venture backed, if this is going to the Wayback Machine, but yeah, there was a lot of people with a lot of coin. Ironically and sadly, a lot of them, a lot of folks kind of had the belief they had the Midas touch and kind of invested it and doubled down, and it didn't go so well. But nevertheless, it was, I mean, you remember, it was an amazing sort of cult following. It was a great time to be there. I was telling someone the other day about the VCs that were backing it. There was one called HVP, Houston Venture Partners. They were basically astronauts. Now, I'm a total space geek. So one of the events I showed up at, Alan Shepard's hanging out in the bar there. It's like, oh, that's pretty cool. So, but
Alan Shepard was one of the guys who said that SpaceX shouldn't, we shouldn't allow space or private companies shouldn't be going to space. Shepard was one of the guys, and wasn't it was it John Glenn who also said, it was a couple of them, they came together and testified before Congress, right, to not let SpaceX go. But all right, so Rick, the background here for the community, everybody.
Definitely watch the podcast or watch the IIoT Shootout.
Yeah, so there's a video we posted a couple weeks ago, the IIoT Shootout, which was me responding to a thread that Rick initiated in the Discord server. Obviously, Rick doesn't really need any introduction. If you're in industrial automation, you already know who he is. But it's great to have you here. We, in the interest of full disclosure, I do not normally have a conversation with the guest prior to the podcast. We did talk for maybe 15 minutes beforehand to just kind of like warm up. So, and we did hear a couple of great stories already. So, and I kind of gave an outline of, hey, this is what we'd kind of like to cover. So this podcast is the goal of this podcast for me is to, I want the community to hear where Rick thinks the industry should go. Talk a little bit about where it's been, but more importantly, for people to hear Rick's opinion on where the industry should go and likely will go. And so we're going to try and get there through the conversations that we have today. So what I want to do is just quickly, if we can start with, your background. You and I we have the upstate New York connection. In fact, we were talking about earlier, Rick and I have hung out at the same bars in Ithaca, New York, and our wives went to the same high school, and I mean, really crazy background, So, but Rick and I don't know each other. This is the first time I'm meeting Rick in person. We've talked privately in Discord a couple of times, but so Rick, why don't you just, for everybody, go ahead and give the arc of your career, and we'll kind of start there.
Sure, let's give the express version. So I graduated in the mid 80s. Kind of, if you think about the time there, the PC was just coming out, right? I had 2 computer classes in college. I got a D- and an F. So I'm like, this is definitely not something I'm going to be doing.
Wait, real quick. You were at Cornell when one of the biggest, the one of the most famous hacker incidents ever happened was a Cornell student. Were you there when he did that in the mid 80s?
I don't recall that. No.
Okay. I mean, I remember he went to federal prison and everything. He was, I remember it was all over the local news. So it may have been like 87, 88 or whatever. But anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off.
For perspective, I was still punch cards and a deck writer.
Okay, got it. All right.
For now. Anyway, so graduated. I worked for Boeing for one day. So my grades were not great. So I had limited choices graduating. I went and signed up. I was going to be running the rewiring projects for the CH-47 Chinooks out of Boeing Berthold, and went in, signed up for my benefits on a Friday. And then over the weekend, Luke and Steele called. It was a job closer to home. I'm like, taking that. So I know I'm on a government list somewhere now yeah. So I actually started out industrial engineering, doing kind of operations analysis, capital project stuff, kind of classic IE, OR stuff.
Was this a rolling mill, or what?
Yeah, so we did mostly specialty plate, a lot of armor stuff for submarines, a lot of specialty stuff, not too much commodity stuff. We also had, electric arc furnaces, kind of a fully integrated mill. Not especially as like a Nucor or somebody like that, but more broad. But anyway, so we an opportunity opened up to go join the operations side in our heat treating facility. And that was like where I learned more about how manufacturing really works, because it's the people aspects. It's about what metrics matter. We'll talk, we can have there's a whole riff on Discord about like adding safety and other metrics to kind of OE. But that was probably one of the coolest experiences of my life, right? Because I'm doing it's so satisfying in the morning. You have a pile of unfinished work at one end, at the end of the day, it's on the other. I got to run cranes, got to run plasma torches, real shit. Same time, we were doing a major automation upgrade, and this company is kind of cool. They were super progressive in applying technology. So this was in the kind of VAX era, right? So mini computer stuff, but they had a little bit ahead of their time, that they had a group that kind of lived in that void between IT and OT. So we were doing all kinds of wild stuff, what you would call MES today, what you would call HMI today, all with kind of custom stuff. But I was on the ops side helping them, define the needs for that. And then an opportunity opened up to go join that team. Well, I literally went to my county library, pulling books off the shelf to learn like how to program and learn a Fortran and Pascal and taking floppy disks home. And I kind of dug it. So I'm like, well, this is interesting. I should run with this. So I spent a year and a half helping actually do the automation in this line. So we, controller integration, the whole bit, right? What was kind of wild is I remember the same dudes and girls I was working with, when we started putting the technology on the floor, a couple of things happened. It was amazing to see how many of them went out and bought a PC for home. It was like, it kind of spread the value of what computing could do. So that was kind of cool. Second thing was watching the whole terminology change from charging a plate into the furnace became F3 in it, and pulling it out became F4 in it, right? It just transforms how you interact with stuff.
And what was this? Was this 1990? Is this 89, 90? When?
This would be late 80s, right? Okay. So PC was just starting to kind of make its mark known. So I really enjoyed that my stint there, and got to really see kind of all sides of the business, right? And then a friend of mine called me up. It's a larger systems integrator. You may know them. They eventually became Tava. So Tava, if you recall, was like that amalgam of a bunch of integrators. It was all control systems. So I joined them. We were probably about 20 people at the time. We ended up being about 100, but we were doing a lot of custom stuff still then, Unix and DEC stuff. Then we discovered like Involution, Wonderware. It was kind of right at the dawn of that stuff starting to fire up. Even the first MES stuff. Like, I don't know if you remember a product called Palms.
I do. Yep.
Palms was like way ahead of its time in retrospect, right?
It was like, too early. It was too far ahead of its time.
Right, but you could integrate it with SCADA, have event-driven stuff. I mean, it was just kind of cool. So we got we're all products of the stuff that we did in the past, right? So you kind of learn a little bit of that. Hey, that's a cool capability. That's neat. So I worked in integration, all kinds of projects, some big SCADA batch. I did PLC work, a little of everything. I actually, my most therapeutic thing was like, if you could get a little time, just wiring a panel. It's like cleaning a pool. It's therapeutic, like just repetitive work. So did a little bit of everything. Did that for a bunch of years, and I got to know the local Wonderware distributor quite well. And we were still doing factory link, you name it, we did it all.
And where were you? You were in the Northeast at this time? You were okay.
Philly suburbs, yep. And customers were all around the world. I was going to Philippines to do like brewery startups and all kinds of wild stuff. But mostly North American companies, and then you'd go, the drill. You've been there.
Yep.
So the co-founder of the local Wonderware distributor, I got talking to him about things that what Wonderware is doing. I said, hey man, it would be awesome if InTouch did this, and this. So he hooked me up with a guy named Phil Huber, who was one of the co-founders of Wonderware.
Yep.
And we hit it off. But ironically, I ended up the opening was for a sales gig. So I ended up that was my first sales role ever. but it's very techie sale, right?
Sales engineering, more sales engineering than, okay, cool.
It was account exec, but with my skill set, I turned it into a more technical role. But it was fun, right? So I got to working with distributors. What I learned.
Hey Rick, how did you get it? How did you get it so that the client didn't want you to do the project? Like, this is one of the things that I've always seen is that, you know, even if I only want to do business development, because I'm an architect and I have technical aptitude in that background, they always end up wanting me to do the project, even if I'm just doing the development. How did you avoid? I mean, and there are people watching this who go through that exact same thing. How do you avoid that?
So as a salesperson who I'm more a relationship person, I kind of felt like I wanted to be involved, right? So an integrator or the in-house folks would be doing, I said, hey, I'm a resource for you, right? We did the same thing at Lighthammer, ThingWorx, whatever. We had that fleet of sales engineers who would support the integrator, the end customer.
Got it. So you weren't decoupling. You were along for the ride in a support role. Got it.
As much as you can, right? Depends what your boss wanted to, ring the bell too. But, particularly like not so much with like SCADA and control projects, but more of the kind of higher level stuff, MBS, intelligence, and analytics stuff. Like that first site, you're still kind of selling, right? It's not rolled out to all the other sites. So, right. So being more involved with that was like success assurance, just as much as
you're building value equity is what I always call it. In that first one, you're doing value equity,
100%. And I think the smarter integrator, we learned this at ACS, smarter integrators, like if you have to kind of competitively bid every single project, that's a painful way to do business. If you're a trusted supplier and you get repeat business, it's awesome. So I tried to carry that forward. So I did the sales gig, and I was able to still keep that vehicle to do product feedback to the technical team, forms those relationships. Then I got an entrepreneurial bug, took a little detour. That one was a disaster. Came back, and I did a second stint at Wonderware, this time on product management.
So you were at Wonderware proper. This wasn't with Qmation. This was Wonderware proper. Got it. Okay. Then for those of you guys don't know, the local Wonderware distributor in Horsham, PA, just outside of Philly, is Qmation. That's what I want. Sorry, I realized you didn't mention that while we were recording.
So what was interesting then is we went on an acquisition binge. We bought a company called Soft Systems Engineering, which was our batch package. We bought a company called Enitech, which is the MES solution.
I remember that acquisition. Yep.
Well, painfully, I do. Let me tell you what happened. So I got dumped in my lap, and basically within not long, 30 to 60 days, maybe 90 days, of the 20 engineers that were based in Cupertino, we ended up with one. And that was so they all left. And it was a very difficult situation because we had built all this. We just fired up the sales machine, customers were deploying it. And now there's basically nobody to do maintenance or advance the product. And
what was the if you can share, what was the cause of the exodus?
I probably just so much opportunity in Cupertino, right?
Because this is where are we right now? And that was sort of late 90s, right? Is that
exactly late 90s, right? 96-ish. Okay. So, and it was a big acquisition at the time, right? They spent like $20 million on this, which turned out it was basically more or less a VB prototype, not real product. Let's fast forward. So now I'm holding this bag of shit that customer commitments, no future roadmap. I have no developers, right? So what do I do again? I go to the library, learn Visual Basic, roll up my sleeves. Well, that turned out to be the greatest thing that ever happened to me because it got me technical again. And that's what my juices just started flowing. So I got to just dive in, got to build a team in York, a lot of which became people I work with at future companies. So building a team, but it was fun. I actually I love coding and creating and, making stuff. It also taught me about extensibility, right? Because here we're in an environment where, every MES implementation is different. You got to be able to add new UX components or new this or new that. So it trained me to kind of think in that mindset as well.
Right, and it's 80% homogeneous, right? 80% uniform, 20% custom or heterogeneous, and you whatever platform you're working in has got to be able to handle both sides of it, right? You got to do floor level CI/CD, but you also got to do enterprise level CI/CD for more, uniform components across the entire implementation. I always say this all the time. Any idiot can do it, and I don't mean to disparage anyone, but any idiot can build a SCADA system because SCADA is SCADA, right? But MES is a whole different ball of wax, completely different ball of wax.
And I think the one thing I realize is that, like, if you think about it, SCADA is more or less an extension of control.
Right.
And when we get down to the control layer, like, there's only so many ways to do a control loop or safety interlocks or whatever.
Right.
There's best practices. As you kind of go up, I always used to say it's like an hourglass. At the bot, controls fairly uniform, and like ERP, how you do a purchasing process or close the books. They're all, well, Enron was different, but they're all sort of the same, right? But it's when that amorphous layer of MES is like, hell, no two lines are sometimes the same. Right? So that was a big eye opener. I did that for a while, did the product management side. And then the light bulb went off there because I saw, we bought this batch stuff from one company. We had this MES stuff from another. Then we bought a historian from a South African company. And we bought this other thing from this, this AI assistant thing from another company. And we had all our stuff. And I'm like, wow, I'm knowing what we're dealing with to kind of bring all this stuff together. Then all my experience with these customers who have a mixed bag of everything's legacy the moment it goes in, and so much custom stuff and SQL Server and Oracle and whatever. So I'm like, well, there's an opportunity here to build something kind of like, if you think what, Inductive and Wonderware and all these folks did on top of any controllers or devices you want. Now at the information layer, there's an opportunity to do that same thing, right? A uniform way to get at that stuff. I left and started a company called Lighthammer, although we had a little detour there too. So the first thing I did was actually extensions to Wonderware, specifically to let people build custom stuff where it wasn't possible before. And then also kind of custom alarm handling and all these kinds of things. Turns out the big use case for sophisticated alarm handling was prisons. They sold a lot into like,
really?
So it's security, whole security application. So that was like, we sold thousands of licenses into the security world. Bizarre. But anyway, Wonderware bought the IP, and that became the seed money for Lighthammer. And Lighthammer was really focused now more on that kind of uniform visualization. We called it the Plan Information Portal initially. So we were writing connectors to SCADA, to OPC stuff, to historians, to SQL databases, but it was more like visualization, right? So, web-based. Interestingly, we took a lot of business from the historian providers instead of their kind of native trend viewers.
Yeah.
In a browser now, you could have it on your mobile device. You could have it from a remote site. I was like, wow, that's kind of cool.
From a technical perspective, did you transform all data and events into time series style event store? Okay, got it. All right.
Actually, we didn't. That one was more about leave it in, because we didn't have the cloud then. It was leave it in the system.
In the native system of ownership. Okay, got it.
So we had a uniform data structure, and then we had a uniform historical access API that if the underlying data store, for example, didn't do aggregates or time weighted averages or whatever, you do that in the kind of adapter layer. And then, Java applets, it's what we had at the time, right? Java applets, web server, serving up XML,
you had basically two choices, ActiveX or Java applets, right? So
exactly. And you know what, I joke? And there's some funny videos if you look about SVG and like the early days. SVG almost died, but if you think about it, at the time when we were doing Lighthammer, you couldn't draw a circle. You couldn't draw a circle in a web browser. And it sounds stupid, right? But you literally couldn't draw a circle in a web browser. So at SVG and stuff like that, we've all taken advantage of that. Anyway, so that started doing real well. And then once we realized we kind of now had an API to all these different systems, right? That it was useful not only for people visualizing it, but to integrate it with other business processes.
On the business side, right? Yeah.
So
that's where SAP comes in. SAP sees the same thing you are already aware of. Yeah. And they're like, hey, we want that.
Interestingly, a customer told them that. Our biggest customer, at the time was Dow Corning. And when they gave us their biggest order, true story, CIO flew in, went out for dinner, and just as a joke, they had one of those like golf tournament size checks that they brought out.
Did they really?
Yeah, because they knew they were kind of like launching us, right? It was kind of cool. We had a great relationship in fact, I did a bunch of consulting for them just on the house after, many years later, just to say, thank you. You have to appreciate what your customers have done for you. It matters. Right. Pay it forward.
So right now we're in early 2000s. Is that?
So 2005, we got acquired by SAP, right?
Got it.
And they took it from 7 million to like 50 million in sales the first year because they're pervasive, right?
Right.
Similar.
And there was already a loaded market, right? I mean, at that point, right? You're unlocking all this value in that ERP layer, but there's no unification to your operations, right? And so all along comes this web-based tool that can tap into both, right? So.
And quite frankly, if you look at their customer base, it's the who's who of manufacturing, right? Yeah. And SAP has that relationship where like, here's what guy pulls open his code. Here's what we're selling this year, right? So we were in vogue and it sold a lot. But typical big co, right? They're a great company, they're awesome culture. But if you're an innovator, we spent probably 2 years just SAPizing the product, not making it functionally. And I'm a creator, right? So I did get a cool gig though. Then I moved over at SAP Research doing something called Future Factory. And so we were doing interesting stuff around.
Remember that project? I actually remember that project.
Augment. So we did like additive manufacturing and indoor position, all kinds of experimental stuff. Once again, it created this light bulb moment. We had an initiative called Real World Awareness. And the idea was if business processes in retail, manufacturing, public safety and security, whatever, healthcare could be intersect with the physical world, what could happen, right? Could it be better? Again, so I put together this whole pitch. It was originally going to be called SAP ThingWorx, right? And it was like I had the pitch, and the problem is it's very difficult as anyone that's been in a large organization to do organic innovation, right? It just funded, approved, it's pulling zero-sum game. And there were some ways with enough patience, probably could have gotten it done, but I gave it my best. And then we decided, that's not going to work out. I then did a little detour there, went over back to Wonderware a third time. By the way, the first 2 times I left Wonderware, my wife got pregnant. So I was kind of worried if I went back. I only wanted 2 kids, but I went back and I kind of brought the same idea, right? Here's this opportunity to connect all these other data sources to expand what we've learned. Think of what we've learned in SCADA and automation,
right?
How it translates perfectly into IoT stuff. We solve hard problems, right?
Right.
That things blow up. They have to work reliably, right? Anyway. So I tried to pitch that at Wonderware, just again, kind of for a variety of reasons, it wasn't going to work out.
And you were there at the time when they were investing an enormous amount of money in the development of the expansion of system platform.
Yep.
10.1 got launched under your
about
right.
Same time.
They were already investing a shit ton of capital in, they were all in on system platform right at that. I mean, that's literally you were there right at that time, and maybe that's one of the reasons that they, weren't gonna invest somewhere else.
I would also say, Walker, that it had to do with a very negative experience that the company had with the acquisitions in MES, right? Because they didn't pan out. So it was like anything out of our core. Think of what OSIsoft went through the years. Like every time they would, try to go too far afield of the historian, it didn't go that well.
Right.
I think kind of like retreated to the known and missed opportunity. This is why, if some bigger companies figure this out one day, how to innovate organically, they'll do fine. But I've yet to see anybody that really knows how to do it.
Well, I have a couple of opinions. Two opinions. Number one, in the software world, the best way to innovate organically is to create a platform that lends itself to innovation in an isolated environment where it can be plugged into the platform. So in the software world, and this is what inductive automation, by the way, does. They do 2 things I think exceptionally well. Number one, Carl Gold and Kobe Clegg are maniacal in their focus on the 5 pillars of the platform, right? And there are so many ideas they shoot down because they simply don't live up to the pillars of the platform, right? They, open, unlimited, et cetera, right? The other option, and I'm seeing this more and more and more, like, and whether it's you're looking at Toyota AI Ventures or you're looking at Tesla's offshoots, right? What these organizations are doing is they're literally spinning up entire innovation groups that are separate companies that don't fall under the management structure of the parent company, and they're giving them a little bit of seed money and seeing what they can do. And that's another option. And it's crazy that a lot more tech companies don't take that approach because it's not that expensive. You know what I mean? You can seed it for a couple $100,000, which, is nothing. I mean, it's literally nothing. And you give them a 9-month window to show return and then decide whether you're going to do Series B and, whatever.
Preach, man. I agree. And then similar, like Google's actually, Alphabet's actually doing a little bit of that stuff. They just launched a robotics company the other day. I do think that the problem is the big co's have a tendency, if they do, some have tried that, they reabsorb it too quickly, right? Yeah. Because the way you sell, the way you support, everything's different in an early company than a mature company. Yeah. Mainstreaming it too early and imposing all it must be localized into 400 languages. It must be 5029 accessible. Those are all important things, but not early on when you're trying to figure out.
Because process stifles. A commitment to process stifles innovation. And I mean, hell, you can't build new innovative. Look at what inductive automation did when they launched in 2002. It took them 6 years to figure it out. TatSoft, 2008 was when inductive automation became a legit, real Ignition became a legit platform. TatSoft, same thing. Mark Taccolini and those guys were developing for like 5 years before they were ready for the big time. And these organizations that are doing these offshoots, if they're not committed to a 5 or 6 year development cycle, right? They can be looking for value incrementally, every 9 months, every 12 months. Yeah, we're trending in the right direction, but you got to be prepared to let that go for 4 or 5 or 6 years before you try to bring it back into the organization proper. It's not mature enough before then.
And I think that time frame, like I like to think I cheated on the test in the sense that, like, having worked at all these other companies, wrote some of these other platforms, you kind of learn, it kind of gives you a jump start. Like if you looked at ThingWorx, for example, just event-driven execution, right? The way the script engine used to work in InTouch, you'd see byproducts of best practices, not patented or copyrighted shit, but best practices that you kind of build upon, right? Mm-hmm. That can compress that time. And I'm a believer in kick-ass teams, right? If you have a 10X, you hire 10Xers, you can do amazing stuff. So so the Wonderware gig didn't work out. We started up ThingWorx, kind of going after that real world awareness.
Where did that come from? So this is one of the big questions that I'm sure everybody wants to know is, how did you, when you left Wonderware, after and at that time, I think this is 2008, give or take, in that region, right?
Oh no.
When did you? I saw ThingWorx for the first time in 2013 or 14. I think is the first time I saw it, or maybe 12. It could have been as early as that, but I think it was 13, 14. A, where did the idea come from? And B, how did you go ahead and implement it? Like, what were the steps you went through?
I pull this out all the time. Like, This is literally like, that's where it came from. We got in a room. This is the original,
and this is the team that you kind of carry with you, your core group. You sit down, you say, let's go ahead and brainstorm this.
Exactly. There's 4 of us. And ThingWorx 0.1 was actually all .NET based. And then we kind of just threw all that away and kind of went each team, it was Flash and .NET, as bizarro as that sound. Mm-hmm. We evolved it, kind of rewrote it a few times. I wrote most of the platform code, kind of the guts code, but it came down to kind of what maybe an earlier primitive version of what you would call UNS, right? It was like thing model. Hey, we fucked that up in the sense that we invented too many new terms, and it just took way too long for people to grok what we were, some of these things.
Well, Thing stood the test of time. I mean, now, in that ThingWorx world, everyone knows what a thing is, and thing is a term that stuck.
We just ended up like thing shapes and data shapes and all these. I read this book. What was it called? Man, shaping things. Anyway, I went to, some people like grab onto some meme and then take it too far in their naming. Well, we kind of did that. Nevertheless, the product was solid. So how
long was the development from 09 to?
Well, it was ready to go, usable in 11. You could actually deploy it. I'd say that the interesting challenges, though, was trying to deal the two really different domains. IoT, like fleets of, a million connected whatevers, versus the world we know, IIoT, with big chunky systems that you're pulling stuff out of, more on-prem. So trying to have it serve both masters was an interesting but kind of fun challenge. The secret sauce, if you really were just kind of cut to the chase of what I think we did well, was the thing model and the abstraction, right?
Yep.
If you could interact and compose with stuff, event driven. I know we're all passionate believers
in the high byte world, we call it data ops, right? Data ops is the component. Thing does what data ops does, right? Yep. And creates the abstraction. Flows and high byte are the event triggers and in that data ops platform, which I think is the best data ops platform available. But ThingWorx was way ahead of its time. I mean, it was definitely, it was the right solution at the right time.
Exactly.
Right.
It might not have evolved as much as I would have liked, but
you had the market cornered
at the time.
I mean, you had the market cornered at the time. You really did.
Well, what was cool is Cisco, IBM, all these other knuckleheads were doing all their marketing about, internet of this, smarter planet. They didn't have anything to deliver.
And they were not delivering on it. Right. Exactly.
So they got everybody lathered up and like, we got something. The color cool thing we did, which I'm pretty proud of, is we wrote a JavaScript engine that integrated with the JVM. We kind of adapted some open source stuff. I believe if you use open source, you have to give back to it. So we shared most of what we did there, but we plugged in the whole thing model. So kind of like almost IntelliSense, right? You could do really cool, kind of elegant stuff in the scripting environment. So my focus was the platform, and then in the kind of the circle of life thing. For the UX side, I ended up teaming up Phil Huber, who was the founder of Wonderware. Was a mentor of mine, just huge fan. He had a team of a company who had just been kind of essentially put out of business by Apple overnight. So he had this great team, and we're like, dude, let's do this. So he built our next gen of our UI, all HTML5 based, the mashup environment, just killer team. And that was important because the coolest stuff in the world, like all UNS and everything, people like to demo it. You need a face, right? You need something. You need an ID. You need an app. You need a whatever. So that kind of brought it to life. Now, like you could actually show people what it could do. Go into a customer site and in an hour have data coming up on a screen. That's powerful.
Yeah. So the PTC acquisition. So that happened in 15, right?
13. No, actually, end of 13.
And where did that come from? And
so I was, just to clarify, I was the CTO. I was the tech dude. Did I benefit? Sure, of course. I was a shareholder like everybody else. We were about to do our Series C. The biggest inflection point for a lot of software companies that are in that kind of
scale or sell,
or die, right? Scale or die. Is growing your sales and support organizations. So we're going to raise like $10 million, which at the time was a shit ton of money. Now it's like, that's what a lame raise that would be, right? But whatever. I'm a believer in capital efficiency. Nevertheless, we're about to do that, and PTC, Jim Helpelman had a very similar vision. Like, okay, what happens if you could like bring product designs to life with IoT data, or and you loop it back into the engineering process. So he actually, to your point about different innovation models, he took a bunch of his best of his best, put them off in a separate location in Cambridge, and said, go develop something. Well, somewhere along the way, we met someone on that team, and they came down and met with us, and they're like, went back and they said, we could build it, or we could get like a 3-year jump by doing something with these guys. So we originally started as kind of an OEM relationship.
Got it.
We're in the funding mode. They basically bought our future, is kind of what the best way to describe it. We were fully ready to just keep going like we were going. So we were probably about 50 people at the time. And then as soon as we got, acquired, then the resource, now we're 400 people. Sometimes that's not great, right? Sometimes it's good. I mean, you appreciate the love. I think we might have over accelerated things a little bit. You kind of lose some of that. I don't know. I'm a believer in smaller teams, I guess.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer. I build all my teams using a T-based team building model. So, top of the T is the SME, the thing that makes that human being unique. The bottom part of the T is the one thing we all have in common, the thing we're all working towards. And I believe that teams greater than 20, as soon as you hit the 20 mark, that's when efficiency, diminishing return starts flying in. And so if you want to be agile and fast and innovative, it's 20 or smaller, working with no middle management, using only subject matter experts, and the subject matter expert is managing their subject matter. But at some point you have to scale above 20. So I think from the executive level,
2 pizza rule.
Yeah. From the executive level, what you have to decide is what mode we're in with this product, what mode we're in with this business. If we're in a growth mode, then we're going to go ahead and accept less innovation for growth. But if we're in innovation mode, then we have to say, okay, growth is going to be slow so that we can innovate, right? And there are going to be way more hurdles. There are going to be a lot more bugs, a lot more sleepless nights when we're in innovation mode.
And you're exactly right. That's a choice you have to make.
Correct.
I will say, and this is a philosophy or a theory or whatever. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, you get to that point, which I completely agree with, right? 15, 20 people, you start to lose productivity. This is where I think the whole technical architecture can come into play, in the sense that extensibility and APIs and all, if you can decouple certain parts of your product, like the UX can evolve at one pace, the platform another, connectivity at another, add-ins at another. Now you can start to have like 3 or 4 20-person teams that can run somewhat asynchronous.
Yep.
But it takes a lot of discipline, right? To not break those, to have that architecture early enough. The magic happens then, of course, when it's a whole ecosystem that can start doing that innovation. And just the concept that a company nowadays wouldn't deliver an open API on their product is to me. And it's
I go on more rants. I go on more rants on that one subject than any other subject I go on rants on. Well, that and ERP. But
what's the possible? I just don't even get the possible rationale behind that. I mean, if for no other selfish reason that it now allows your own team to innovate faster.
I think that they, here's what I think. I don't say this very often, but I think most of the players in our industry mean well, and the vast majority are suffering from imposter syndrome. And if you are not confident, if you believe you're faking it, then you are going to be very careful about what you share with other people, because you are afraid they'll discover you're faking it, right? And you'll never see a developer more vulnerable than when they're going to show you their source, right? And a software development API is as close, when you get to that API to do, that's as close as you're getting to source. And I honestly think it makes imposters feel incredibly uncomfortable. And I really believe that is one of the key reasons that you will see people at the top. You're different. You're an executive who has a lot of technical aptitude. And I know that you've been focused on the CTO side, but I can tell you, this as well as I do. You are more adept. You are more technically adept than the average CTO in our industry. Most of the CTOs that I meet in our industry have absolutely no business being in the role that they're in. Their vertical, their expertise is it's a 10th, it's a 20th, it's a 100th of what it needs to be. You have a really broad breadth of knowledge, and it's obvious. One of the questions I was going to ask you earlier was, did you calculate, you took a very similar path that I took, right? And we've never spoken. I had a whole strategy about I need to expose myself to as many industries and as many technologies as humanly possible. And I also I need to be in a product development, and I need to be in operations, and I need to be in engineering. I need to be in product engineering. I need to learn all these various things. And that was calculated. Was it calculated for you, or was it just sort of where I ended up?
I think it's a little bit of both, Walker. I think it's like there's always a little revisionist history. So I preach that now, right? How important that is. I think from a lot of sense, it sort of happened. I forgot I did it. It's not unlike I did a stint in high speed printing, for example, right?
Yeah.
Right. We have a
so
lot.
Crazy. So crazy.
But yeah, junk, literally like the largest junk mail. We built our own machines. It was pretty amazing. But yeah, so this Whitman sampler or the Lego blocks you accumulate over time. I think it's just as much different domains, but also those different roles. Like I got to tell you, for being involved in software startups, having been on the sales side was huge for me, right? That seeing that side of it, pricing is the most black art thing. You can't figure it's, but how to deal with a channel and what's important to them. And anyway, so bottom line is, yeah, I 100% agree. I'm a lifelong learner. I believe in having that kind of diverse background. For me, I guess it happened a bit by luck, and then I kind of realized, hey, that's probably a good way to conduct myself.
It's funny you said about the lifelong learner. I was dropping my sons off at school today, and my son Jared, my 17-year-old, he asked me this question. I don't remember what the actual question was, but I do remember what my answer was. Here's what it was. Someone asked me, hey, Dad, have you read the book The Children of Men? And I said, yeah. And I said, oh, and I gave a synopsis, and my son asked, Dad, is there nothing you haven't read? Like, why is it you never say, oh, I never read that or whatever? And I said, Jared, I'm going to give you the same answer Gary Vee gives all of his friends when they ask him, how are you a gazillionaire now? And he says, because when you were at the Jersey Shore and you were going to bars and partying, I was grinding. And I say to my kids all the time, I spend 90 minutes each night reading just tech journals. I literally set aside 90 minutes to go through technical descriptions of new products coming out in our industry. And I said, and I do that 5-6 days a week. Yep. You add up that 90 minutes, 5-6 days a week, and then you add up an hour I do every single morning that's totally outside of my work. And those hours I'm 47, but I probably have the experience of someone who's 57, right? Because of all those additional hours I've added. And that's maybe another 10,000 hours, 12,000 hours. This is why intrinsic motivation, lifelong learning, it's so critical, because though, that 1 hour doesn't sound like a lot, but that 1 hour added with another 1,999 hours means a whole lot. It's a whole year of experience, So yeah, it's and it's funny. Everybody I talk to, like entrepreneurs, people who have broad and diverse experience, they all say the exact same thing. That, I'm a lifelong learner.
The other thing, everybody talks about hustle and this and that, and it matters a lot, but luck does too, right? Yeah. I would always admit that sometimes it's timing. You can make yourself more lucky. You can put yourself in the right place to be lucky, but I would never discount the importance of stuff like that too. There's a lot of bright people on the planet, right? Doing awesome shit. And if you're successful, this is another thing. If you're a really successful person, you are rarely the smartest person in the room, right? Because really, really successful people, when they look around and they're like, I'm the smartest one here, they go find another room with smarter people. And then you have other people who want to be a big fish in a little pond, and they want to be the smartest person in the room. And one of the biggest things is continuously moving to teams or into rooms where you are challenged, where they elevate your game. That's a huge component of lifelong success, And I think, I was lucky, right? I encountered people early in my career that became key to all the things that we did. We worked together so well that then these are just some of the best, the best that were out there. But you also pursued excellence, right? One of the things, this is another, this is something I talk about in my book, which is not related to industrial automation. And I'm going to go on a little sidebar here, but I think it'll be valuable for the audience. Something that most people don't know about me
is I wrote for a magazine called Trap Shooting USA for about a year and a half when I worked at Nucor Steel in 2009, 2010. My dad, who I talk about, my adoptive father, he's in the Trap Shooting Hall of Fame for New York State. He was a really famous trap shooter. Since you lived in PA for a really long time, like most of the best trap shooters in American history are from Pennsylvania, including a guy named Frank Little, who's
I could have worn my Beretta hat, and I've actually gotten a sporting clay lesson from Anthony Matarese. So
sweet. And I actually know Tony. I actually know him personally. So my dad shot for Beretta initially, then he went to Remington, and then he went to Sights, and Sights is who he shoots for now, which is another interesting story. They were a machine shop. A guy, Jerry Smith in Maryland or something, he owned a machine shop who he made tooling for manufacturers, and he decided, I'm going to build the greatest gun ever made. And he literally just built it from scratch, called Sights, SEITZ, if you want to see it. But so I wrote for this magazine for a year and a half. I took one class in college called media writing. And everybody asks me, how did you end up writing for that magazine? Right. And this is about the pursuit of excellence thing. And here's the story behind it. And I think you're going to have a gazillion examples as well. I wanted to follow my dad around while he was shooting, and trap shooting is a very, very expensive sport. And, I worked at Nucor. I made good money. I had a 6-figure salary, but I didn't have the kind of salary where I could raise my young kids and go travel with my dad. So I would go around. I brought a high-speed sport camera with me, and I would take photos of my dad and all of the guys he shot with at these huge trap shooting events. I mean, we're talking 200, 300 houses, and you have thousands of people shooting over a course of a week. And I got really good at taking action shots where people would shoot and I could catch the clay pigeon over their shoulder, blowing apart, and that was before you could take 30 photos, in one, just pull and just find the one where it worked. And then I went on a blog called trapshooters.com, and I basically would write articles. I would basically do a post, and I would do a summation of and I would put hours and hours and hours into writing these posts. And my wife would be like, what is wrong with like this? That's a huge investment for a hobby. And then all of a sudden, I wanted my posts to be the best posts. I wanted them to be the posts that everybody would read. And then all of a sudden, this publisher from England sends me an email, and he says, hey, I really love what you're doing on trapshooters.com. Would you be interested in doing that for my magazine? So doing exactly what you do right now on trapshooters.com, except you do it for Trap Shooting USA. And what's really cool, it's really kind of crazy. I actually still have the copy at my house. In 2009, there was a guy named David Schaefer from Maryland, he was a plumber from Maryland, who he ended up breaking the world record for the most consecutive broken registered targets, and he broke it by like 1,000 birds, 2,200 something. And I reached out to Dave, and I said, hey, Dave, I would love to just like travel with you and interview you. And he's like, man, every reporter's, I said, well, my dad's Jerry Ostrander, and I'm a working class dude. I know you're a plumber. I work in a steel mill. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. And I got to hang with him for a whole week. I got to write the profile, and my photo was on the cover of that magazine. I took the photo on that magazine. I wrote 4 articles in there, plus the feature. I still have that magazine to this day. And when people come to my house, they're like, I didn't even know you were a writer. I'm like, well, I wasn't. I did it for like a year and a half. But the point was that the reason I believe that was possible, and this goes to your success, the reason I believe that was possible is because of all of the attention to detail in pursuit of excellence, right? And I guarantee, I don't know you that well, but I already know that when you're writing code, you are very hard on yourself about the way you write your code. You pursue excellence in anything that you're developing. And when you do that, amazing things happen to you. Yes, it's about luck. Yes, it's about the people you know, but you also attract the right people because you pursue excellence, and you generate your own luck. And this is a really, really important point that I try to drive home to people all the time when they ask me the question, how do I do what you did? Or, hey, Rick, how did you do ThingWorx, and how do I copy it? Well, part of it's not just the technical details. It's not just building the team. A huge piece of it is up in here. It's mindset. It's the way you approach everything you do, the way you parent, the way you drive, the way you take care of your cars, everything. So I don't know if you agree or not. I hope.
And I love the other content that you produce too, which is non-technical, non-IoT stuff, just to help.
Right.
I mean, I also find, and this is maybe it's a little self-certain, not self-serving is not the right word. One thing I found recently is the importance of giving back, like whether it's mentoring, philanthropy. I do a lot of stuff like, because domestic manufacturing is super important to me. So how can I help? That's why I joined your Discord. I think it's, and everyone should, by the way, you should be here learning and contributing. Second thing is startups, sharing the shit that I already learned, right? The hard way. If I can help accelerate them or keep them out of some, quicksand or whatever, awesome. Just because, right? And that's a sizable percentage of what I'm doing right now. I'm spending 2.5, I call it work, right? But it's, it's like a couple hours here and there, just helping some interesting companies doing cool stuff. And I just feel that's part of what we collectively have to do.
Have you read, do you know who David Brooks is? David Brooks from the New York Times. He does a thing on PBS on Friday night. Anyway, he's a social scientist. Okay. He wrote a book called The Second Mountain. Have you heard the? Okay, it came out a couple of years ago. He basically says that all of us climb 2 mountains in our lives, right? Mountain number 1 is the mountain you climbed from 1985 to 2013, right? Okay. And mountain number 2 is the mountain you're climbing right now, which is, making the difference. Like now taking the good fortune and making the difference. And everybody does this. We try to climb 2 mountains. And I highly recommend anyone to read the book, because it really reveals to you how we change as human beings over time as a function of our own success. You can go 2 routes. You can become sort of the Donald Trumps of the world, where, he's going to be an alpha businessman his whole life. He's going to die in his 3-piece suit, right? And then there are the other ones who decide, I'm going to give back everything I made, and I'm going to give it back to have a positive impact on the world. Which is why we started producing content. You talked about you don't want startups to fall in the same quicksand. We started shooting the content because we kept seeing manufacturers making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Same technical debt, wasting the same amount of money. In some cases, the manufacturers didn't get a second bite at the apple. Some of them closed. Some of them just didn't have the CapEx to make a second investment to undo the technical debt to help them successfully digitally transform. And when I told Zach, I said, Zach, what I want to do is shoot content and tell people what not to do. I want to educate the community, tell them what not to do, avoid these pitfalls. Here's what you should do. I said, can we do that? And he said, we can do it. And that's where it all came from. And it turned into this, amazing community, which you joined. And which brings me to my next point, which is when you and I were having our initial conversation, and when I did the IoT, what was it that we called it, the IoT shootout or whatever, right? One of the things that I said in that video is, I don't know what Rick values. Like, I don't know what his mission is, because that's not something that's like made public. I do know now through our conversations. I know that, you're a mission focused, values based guy. You want to have a positive impact. Same thing. You want to save manufacturing, all that stuff. But can you take a second to sort of explain what it is your values and mission are, and where do you think that came from? And you had mentioned your dad, and your dad was a mechanical engineer, right? And I'm assuming a lot of that extended from
Sure.
how he raised you. But
I was predisposed to going down the engine. My dad was a mechanical engineer, worked at a forge. And I remember going into the plant, 9 years old, and these giant machines slamming and things fire, and like, this is awesome.
My dad's Superman. That's what you're thinking.
Right. So I was kind of predisposed to go there. Unfortunately, he passed away when I was very young. But I had still have an awesome mom who helped us, through that. But I don't know. I guess one aspect, to be perfectly honest, is working my first gig at Lucan's on the floor. I loved the people I was working with. I loved what I was doing, and it fucking bugs me when people treat like manufacturing workers like replaceable cogs. It just torques me.
100%, man.
And I want to, they've historically been underserved, either not given the influence over what we do with the technology. I'd love to see them be able to tweak their own experience for what is important to them, right?
We call it unlocking potential on the plant floor, and that's exactly what we're saying.
Right on, man. And by the way, thank you for everything your collective community does. It is important and it does matter.
Thank you.
And then just along the way, and maybe this is naive, but like if you make your customers successful and make your customers money, everything else happens, right? You'll do just fine. So I've seen too many companies that they're built to flip, built around some other objective besides making something awesome that brings value to other people.
And by the way, I'm okay. I'm okay with people being pure capitalists, and I'm okay with someone building an organization just to flip it. Here's what I'm not okay with. I am not okay with that being your intention and you communicate your intention as something else. I'm not okay with that. And there are many automation companies. One of the first questions I ask them when they say, hey, Walker, we want you to promote our product or whatever, or evaluate it and then promote it. I will say I talk about values. It's the first thing I talk about. What's your goal here? What's your mission? And there's many companies where they try to act like they're not, I'm not building this to flip it, but it's really clear that they are. I mean, and I'll say, like, this is a standard 3-year, acquisition strategy that you just showed me. And you're telling me you're not building this company to sell it to Schneider or sell it to Rockwell or whatever. I mean, I'm like, I've seen this a million times before. This is acquisition. This is M&A focus.
When you do a deal, there's 4 stakeholders. Everybody thinks of just 1 or 2. There's your customers, there's your employees. Those should be the first 2, right?
Right. Yeah.
Then is your investors and yourselves, right? But one thing that I think is important that companies should think about it when they're going through this process, because by the way, there's going to be a shit ton of consolidation and M&A, and a lot of people are going to get rich. A lot of people are going to be left behind.
The next 10 years is going to be insane.
Chaos. But what I'm worried about is the customers and the partners and the whole ecosystem. Like, you can't leave them behind. I won't go too deep into specifics, but we had 2 suitors interested in Lighthammer, and it really mattered about, for our customer, primarily first 2 groups, customers and employees, what's going to be the best place, right? Mm-hmm. I'm very happy to say that for that deal, SAP was the right place for that. I have probably 50% of that company, it was a very small company at the time, is still working at SAP. That makes me feel really good.
Wow.
It was a good place for them, a good place to build a career. And again, if it's just a financial transaction, that's a shitty way to be, right? And I get it. People do that. I will judge them. I'll be honest with you. I don't think that's the right way to do it. And with ThingWorx, it was premature. We weren't ready to go. It was sort of the proverbial offer you couldn't refuse. And right. We had a lot of talks with them. They invested. Look what they've done with bringing AR into the mix and Kepware. I mean, done some cool stuff. But there's pros and cons of everything. I guess all I'm saying here is put those 2 constituencies towards the front too, for the other vendors in our collective community, because that does matter a lot.
I agree with you 100%. And I want to drive home a point you had already made, which is, I believe in the rank and file. One of the things that I learned by starting on the plant floor, when I graduated from college, this is an interesting story. When I graduated from college, I threw my own graduation party at my house. And because I put myself through school, I'd already bought my house in upstate New York, and I threw it in the backyard. I'd built a deck and everything. And my dad came to my party, and he walks around back, and we're having a beer, and he puts his arm on my shoulder and he says, I'm proud of you. I'm the first person in my family to go to college and graduate. And he says, I'm proud of you, but I'm here to give you some real truth. He said, nothing you learn in school makes a bit of difference in the real world. He said, your education starts today. That's what he said.
Amen.
And I'm glad he said that, because I wasn't like the rest of the college graduates in my first job. Most of them came in thinking, the same thing. They're the smartest person in the room, all that stuff. I went in there terrified that, holy crap, I don't know anything, because my dad told me my education doesn't mean anything. And what I learned was he was absolutely right. There is absolutely no replacement for experience. And And what I learned, where I worked at Cargill, an assault mine to start with, and then I went to Vanguard Media, and then I went to Nucor Steel, and then I went to a tier 1 automotive supplier. What I learned was two things. Number one, the smartest people in any facility work on the plant floor. They know all the problems. They know how to fix all the problems. All you got to do is listen to them or enable them. One of the two. The second thing I learned is that because most of the people work on the plant floor, they are much more likely to lack soft skills or super high emotional intelligence, or how to navigate the political landscape. Their ideas fall through the cracks. And they get dismissed over and over and over again. And when we do our digital transformation maturity assessment, and there are clients who are watching this right now who know exactly what I'm about to say. When we do our DTMA, we have a meeting with the senior leadership. There's a 90-minute meeting I have most of the time with the board of directors, sometimes just a bunch of senior VPs or whatever. And my very first question is, do you understand that you are not the smartest people in your organization? And do you also believe that the smartest people in your organization are out there, the rank and file on the plant floor, and that it is your job to enable them to solve your problems? That's literally what and it warms my heart to hear you say what you said, because it's something I have believed my entire career wholeheartedly, and I've been dedicated to trying enabling the rank and file to solve the organization's problems. And it's I think more and more people are adopting that mindset, but not fast enough, in my opinion.
That, and I think the challenges with staffing in manufacturing these days, right? Unfortunately, I think some leadership is almost going the other way. How can I use technology to turn every manufacturing employee into a replaceable, get them up to speed quick, but make them easily replaceable? You're not going to build that body of knowledge. You can't do continuous improvement that way. It's just not going to happen. You can't write programs to innovate the way human beings innovate.
Right. That's the thing, right? It's I say this all the time. Human beings are not good at data collection. They are not good at data aggregation. They're not good at monotony. Yep. That's where technology comes in. But human beings, especially Americans, they're off the charts in terms of their innovative capabilities. Human beings are outstanding at innovating as long as you create an environment where that is fostered. Agree 100%.
And failure's not chastised, or failure with good intent, right? Is not punished, right?
Yeah. Well, you didn't lose, you learn, right? Failure is part of the In fact, another thing my dad used to say, if you're not failing, you're not taking enough risk, and risk is where you get the biggest reward, Yeah. So let me ask you this. So I know we're to close it out, last couple of questions here. I'd love to hear your take on two things. Number one, in the Discord, you talked about, hey, here's what's really missing in the industry is this component between L3, L4, L4, L5, wherever we put it, which is basically this abstraction layer on top of the unified namespace or on top of the ecosystem. So if you could expand on what you talked about that, just to elaborate on it. I know what you're talking about, but I'd like the community to hear you elaborate. And then if you can follow that up with, where do you think the industry's going? What encourages you? What discourages you? Where do you think we're going to end up?
Sure. First of all, those who have looked at my LinkedIn stuff, I'm an instigator I think we share that, is we're not afraid.
By the way, if you don't follow Rick on LinkedIn, you should. You absolutely should be following Rick on LinkedIn.
So I definitely like to, pro level trolling, but right. But my little iconography was bullshit police, right? And that's I don't like hype. I don't like BS. I like to kind of call it. But ultimately, I joined because I'm trying to find people that actually care about moving the ball forward, right? Like-minded people that don't have that quite frankly are just, I'll admit, I didn't understand the whole UNS concept and what you guys had already put together. I'm super impressed, by the way. So
thank you.
The areas to me that we can expand upon that are and this is just experiential, augmenting those models with I call them services and methods. Like when it's going beyond data, what other capability? So we're just thinking generically, what are other things we can decorate that namespace with that become composable pieces, right? So that's kind of one of the things I want to help contribute, right?
And the microservices piece that you talk about is the most intriguing to me because it is a piece that is glaringly missing, right, from the current architecture.
And it's sort of, unfortunately, it's sort of particularly when you're looking upwards, that's the action end, right? The actionability of new kinds of analytics or whatever, or even just simple events. It's like, okay, I got to call something and do something. So anyway, that's a philosophical thing. The quote unquote standards that are trying to address this, the digital twin, this, that, whatever, they're all, in my opinion, they're all bullshit. They're just classic vendor lock-in, keep other people out. We'll kind of take what we already have, warm it over, and which sucks, right? I just don't like the way that a lot of these groups operate. But if we do nothing else, and I think as you've just done an amazing job of this, is sharing best practices, right? It doesn't have to be a standard. If it helps people do things better, let's do it. Areas that I'm super intrigued on right now. So some are kind of technical, some are more vision and aspirational. I think there is an opportunity for a next gen edge, like rethinking. It's almost like a distributed OS for manufacturing. And one of the companies calls it, manufacturing. But like, what are those foundational services that integrators, OEMs can build from so they don't have to the more that they're all doing plumbing, the more that they're all doing kind of basic ML shit, a waste of time, right? How do we unlock their innovation, not just, and it's difficult for the cloud vendors to do this because they don't have, simply put, they don't have a monetization model for it. They know how to monetize the cloud. They don't know how to monetize the edge, or they used to, but they forgot. It's wide open, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right.
Second thing is I'm a believer in augmentative technology, right? Let's empower people with technology, whether it's collaborative robotics, whether it's, because you know what? The human hand, you were talking about, there's stuff humans can still, we're not even close to duplicating the human hand with a robot.
Agreed.
And our vision, our ability, a human vision system can learn something in 2 samples, right? That's a duck, that's a tree, right? It needs like a huge amount of data to try. Anyway, I think we're, so augmentative technology that helps people be more effective. That's a lot of my little lab here is all kinds of stuff around that, robotics and so on. Those basically, that's where I would like to see the investment, is just empowerment. I think it's important, and we had a brief little discussion on the Discord, one of the customer guys, and I think you actually hit on this in your Emerson rant. Customers are the ones that need to start holding their balls to the fire, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to buy from you if you don't offer these capabilities to me, right? A close, or just define what those are. Customers don't realize in mass how much leverage they have, right? So I would love to see customers start speaking up. The other problem I have, and this is where I think a group like what we're building around the Discord forum, and however we want to do this, is when analysts ask people a question, or a vendor asks someone, what are your problems? I believe that humans have a natural tendency to bound their answer by what they think the art of the possible is, right?
That's right.
So there might be 10 things that they would love to be able to do, but they aren't familiar with a solution that could be possible. We as a community need to just help people through that, right? It's just like, get them out of that thinking of constrained by the art of the possible, because you'd be amazed at what's possible.
You want to hear something funny here? So Cyril Perducat, he's the senior vice president and CTO at Rockwell under industrial AI. Yeah. So someone shared a podcast that he did. He was on Momenta's podcast on the digital thread that he did on September 15th. And it was a guy in Spain said, "Hey, Walker, you're definitely going to want to listen to this." So I was listening to it, and Cyril said, so here to your exact point, I'm going to take a shot at Cyril at the same time I comment on what you said. The art of the possible is so important, right? It really is. And one of the things, when I go into a room, when I'm initially presenting with an organization, I'll ask this question. Hey, who's heard of SCADA? Who's heard of Industry 4.0? Who's heard of ERP? Who's heard of MES? And then everybody raises their hand, and I go, great, forget everything you've ever known about any of those things. For the next 90 minutes, I want you to be thinking about a problem you've been trying to solve that you have not found a solution for. It doesn't have to be a technical problem. It could be any problem, okay? And it could be a problem you've had for a week, a month, a year, 10 years. I want you to be thinking about that problem. I'm going to solve one of your problems at the end of this presentation. I'm going to show you that there's a solution exists today, and I'm going to do it during this presentation. That's number one. Number two, I say the game has changed, okay? Technology there are things that you convinced yourself you discovered 15 years ago are going to cost too much money and take too much time. So you have eliminated those from the realm of possibility in your brain. Today, they're possible. So what you've got to do is erase that from your brain. And so here's how we're going to do that. We're going to start by, on this whiteboard, we are going to build your perfect facility. Not within the constraints of what you already have, but if we were to blow the building up and start from scratch using new technology, what would we build? What would your business workflows be? What would process control look like? How would you organize the human resources? How would you communicate between systems and human resources? We're going to do that from scratch. And what's really funny is that Cyril Perdicat, he took my language nearly word for word in this podcast. And I think this is the reason the guy sent it to me, like, hey, Rockwell has heard loud and clear what you've been saying, and they're using your language. And I mean, and Cyril, for all intents and purposes, may believe it 100%, and he's all in. You know what I mean? But what makes me feel good is that even now Rockwell is communicating using the same language that we're using to help change the way customers, what they consider is within the realm of possibility. And I want to say this one last thing back to the customer piece. I met with one of our biggest customers. Actually, they're one of the largest manufacturers in the world. Yesterday morning, I think they have 100,000 employees or something crazy, and they've been working with Rockwell and all the big vendors, and they had us come in and peer review what all those large companies recommended to them.
Yep.
And I was meeting with their steering team, their digital transformation global steering team, and I said, I'm about to tell you guys something I don't think you've considered. Okay. And that is this. On the one hand, I'm working with these companies. I'm pressuring Rockwell, I'm pressuring Siemens, I'm pressuring Emerson, I'm pressuring these guys. And sometimes I'm doing it publicly. I'm trolling them. Sometimes I'm doing that just to get their attention. We know how many people from those companies watch our videos. We know they're hearing, and then sometimes I'm doing it over dinner, and sometimes I'm doing it the soft skill way. But what's missing is you're not doing it. And what you need is architects in the middle who are telling you what you need to say to them. And because your buying power, okay, is what is going to drive the large OEMs to support the technology that you need to stay in business.
Yep.
Okay. You have to give them the financial incentive to do this. Not every organization's doing it because that's their mission. There are many organizations. I mean, Rockwell, the senior leadership of Rockwell has a fiduciary responsibility to its shareholders, a legal fiduciary responsibility. So the only way to get Rockwell to pivot is if it's in the best interest of their shareholders. You have no choice, and you got to use you have to use the consumer to do that. And I think it's incumbent upon people like us, Rick, and our community to be communicating that to our customers, to the end user, saying we need to leverage our buying power to drive the OEMs in the direction that they need to go so that they have the financial incentive to do so. So I agree with you 100%, man.
Two questions on that. One is, I read a book in the Wayback Machine. It was Stephen Wheelwright, was a MIT guy. I think he was an MIT guy. It was called Competing Through Manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And it was going back like 40 years, right? But it basically said most companies, you remember like what the automotive industry went through, where manufacturing is just a cost, right? Yep. Well, how do you turn manufacturing into a competitive part? Honestly, not every industry will ever be in that mode. Some commodity shit, you might as well just outsource it. But it's a source of competitive advantage to the outsourcer. Nevertheless, so the question becomes, are there enough people left in these manufacturing companies that can take that role? Or are they so dependent on outside expertise to do that? That's one question. The second is when you do these engagements, and this is more like almost a COVID question. Do you find you're as effective remote, or is there an effectiveness amplifier when you're in the same room?
Okay, so initially, I'm going to answer the second question first. Initially, I was definitely much more effective in the room. Mm-hmm. But thank you to Zoom, right? So it wasn't until Zoom came along. Zoom is such superior teleconference technology that once Zoom, they're in that, and the Zoom story is an amazing story, right? Zoom is what WebEx would have built if WebEx was built today, and it was built by the same damn team, right? The WebEx team left and built Zoom. So the Zoom made it, we've gotten comfortable enough now where as long as we insist everyone has their cameras on, okay, and we do our homework on who's going to be in the presentation on Zoom, I'm just as effective now as I am in person. And I've gotten good enough with OneNote so I can do OneNote the way I do a whiteboard. Okay. So that's the second question. The first question is no. The manufacturers do not have the human resources and the capability to do it, the technical expertise. And I actually cover this. I covered this in a video as to why. What's the reason? And it really boils down to who's running the manufacturers. It's accountants, it's HR people, it's not technical people. One of the solutions that we need is, what's the biggest difference between Tesla and every other automotive manufacturer? Every other automotive manufacturer is being run by an MBA, and Tesla is being run by an engineer. And, so there is a level of commitment to technology at Tesla that you just don't see at other manufacturers. But the issue that the manufacturers have is they can't afford the resources right now. The economy of scale, right now, the demand for if you're a senior level architect and you can do the kind of stuff we do, if you're not, you could pull 250 easy. And if you wanted to just consult, you can make $500,000 a year, free and clear, because the demand is just so friggin' high and there's so few people. But what we do, and part of what what Mastermind and mentorship is, it's all about training up those people. And the vast majority of the people who are in those programs work for the end users. And so if you look, we are training up those resources. Part of what we do though, is we will, if we identify a resource internally that is capable, we put that in our report. And there was one I did in Illinois, in outside of Chicago. I literally said, you need to make this guy your CTO, and you got to put him on the board. You got to make this guy your CTO by name. And I said, you got to make this guy who's a controls engineer your director of digital transformation. And they did it. They went and did it. And awesome. Up in New Hampshire, there was another guy. He was like a product engineer. And I'm like, that guy needs to be your director of digital transformation. He literally moved like 4 steps up the food chain. So in many ways, we're doing that. But to your point, and I think you kind of already knew the answer, that no, they don't have those resources. And that's part of the reason we created IoT.University, is so that we can help create those resources. It's not that they don't have smart people. It's not that. It's that there's a learning curve, and there's so many new skills you have to learn, and you got to do it in a certain way, and everyone's going to make the same mistakes. So now you got to do it in a way where they can make the mistakes without costing too much money, so they can learn from those mistakes. And so that's another whole component of the community, is we're trying to train those people up. But I don't think it's truly going to be fixed on the manufacturing side. All emerging manufacturers are run by engineers and tech people, right? They're not run by accountants and HR. And the only companies that are going to survive are the ones that pivot to technical leadership, number one. And number two, they're comfortable with investing in the resources they have to have. Because right now, your digital transformation architect, your average developer on your digital transformation team is going to make more than the general manager in the plant. So, and until you're comfortable with those economics, until your general manager is comfortable with that's obviously a barrier to getting those resources on site.
As a big fan of Mike Rowe and Mike Rowe Works, and it always bothered me, like a great welder, pipe fitter makes less than a shitty programmer. Like,
crazy.
Something's wrong.
It's crazy.
And interesting, to your point, this would be cool to watch, because VW, Dr. Deese is he's an engineer, right? Mm-hmm. He's trying, I get, of course, he's an executive at a very, very large company as well. but it's like, is that enough infusion to drive that kind of transformation through? We'll see.
Volkswagen is number 4. So if you look on the industry 4.0 distribution, VW is number 4 on the list. So you've got Tesla and Amazon are in the top 5. There's one other company which we can't share, and Volkswagen is number 4 on the list. Of the top 10 companies who are the most digitally mature in our sample set, which is like 1,300 something companies now, Volkswagen is the only one in the top 10 that's a legacy company.
It's pretty awesome. So hopefully it plays out, right?
Yeah, the level of commitment to tech at VW it's on par with what Tesla's doing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So last thing, and then we'll call it a day. So what do you do nowadays? I know you're consulting entrepreneurs. You know, what does Rick Bullotta do today? Is it Bullotta or Bullotta?
Bullotta, yeah.
Bullotta. What does Rick Bullotta do? And what is he doing today? And what's his plan? You know, going forward.
So I negotiated with my wife that I wouldn't do another startup.
Okay. Smart woman.
Yeah, right. We restored an old house. You know, I'm getting up there, so I got to start enjoying things. But I spent a lot of time on 2 wheels, mountain bikes, gravel bikes, dirt bikes, stuff like that. I try and earmark about 2.5 days a week for the stuff I call work. So some of it is just like you said, that hour or 2 a day, just screwing around with technology. You know, if I want to debate somebody about blockchain, I better know what I'm talking about. I better know how the implementations differ, and right. So I'd like to be an informed troll, if that's such a thing, right?
The best kind.
Right.
The best kind.
Again, but combination of learning and experimentation. Secondly, I have some active, like more traditional advisory board stuff. Some are more active than others. I did that stint at Microsoft for 1.5 years. It was a 2-day-a-week gig. So that's kind of like my shtick, is kind of coming up with like a chunk of time and then just sprinkle it around on high impact stuff. But similarly, I've met a couple companies, for example, via the Discord server that I'm going to be to informally help. Basically, what I like to do is just share my experience, right? Hey, pitch me as if I was a potential investor or customer, and I'll give you feedback. I'll tell you, show me your product plans and your architecture. I'll give you feedback. And sometimes that's super helpful. Hopefully it's helpful. I look at every one of those engagements.
And I truly appreciate you joining the community, man. I mean, when we launched the Discord server over 1 year ago, I was really worried. I told Zach, I said, this could become a shit show. Like we have to be maniacal about not allowing people to actively sell in the Discord server or to kill it. Right. So, and thankfully the community has, hey, that doesn't mean if somebody says, hey, I'm looking for problem X, or is there someone here who can help me? Damn it, we need to help them. But we're not having people actively sell has made a huge difference. And the fact that it's been sustainable is what I'm most proud of. But the people who have joined, I mean, there are just so many amazing technical talents, amazing business minds in the community. And it's crazy. So many people have told me like how organically their businesses have grown, and just effortlessly, because it's moth to a flame. They're connected with the right client at the right time, who has the right problem, and they got the right solution. And it makes me it does make me really, really proud. But it's the community that does that. All the the Matt Paris's and the Jeff Schraders and the Dave Schultz and the Omars and all those guys, the Mario Ishigawas and the Dan Rikens, all these guys who are just, and now the Rick Bullottas, who are so committed to what the mission is, right? The cultural diffusion that happens there is just, it's profound. I mean, it really just
Walker and I can't respond to 3,000 people by ourselves, right? So
there's no way to
leaders that help us grow the community. We set the vision, right? Walker sets the vision. I help with the implementation, but the community is really what drives it home. And I really appreciate your engagement in the community, Rick. It really comes through in this podcast.
And I'll give my, my standard thing that I used to start every presentation with, and filter is 80% of what I say is fact, 20% is bullshit. I don't know which is which. So when I'm probing, sometimes that's kind of a way to learn. It's a way to solicit, kind of get people to critically think a little bit. Sometimes, man, you're good at it. You know how to poke.
Yeah, I call it, it's conflict theory. I use conflict theory all the time to get, I mean, if I got to poke someone to get them riled up, to get them thinking, to get other people thinking, to get them talking, I got no problem doing it, and neither do you. And if you look at that thread, if you look at that initial, that very first thread you did, it's one of the most meaningful discussions that we've had in the Discord server, and that's saying a lot, because there have been a lot of meaningful conversations in the server, on the server itself.
It's going to be interesting. I think, I hope a lot of people engage and, use, and this community grows. It's going to be interesting challenge as it grows, maybe more segmentation, right, within industry verticals and birds of the usual stuff. But hey, good problem to have, right?
Yeah. So Rick, man, it's been an absolute pleasure, dude. I mean, by the way, I absolutely would love to collaborate. We talked about that offline, would love to collaborate. I think, even after this podcast now, I'm like, yeah, man, this is, Rick and I could make a huge difference together. And I truly appreciate you coming on, man.
Thanks.